Hey there. I was going through my old copy of Star Wars: The Dark Empire. Read a bunch of times the other day, and I got to thinking about some of the criticisms that people had of the Last Jedi and how people like really, really hated what they did to that character. I kind of had mixed feelings on it that I was going to get into, but reading Dark Empire and seeing some of the really dark places that story goes to, even really, and thinking about how well it was received at the time, and I think still is, really got me thinking about The Last Jedi and why that was so polarizing. So let me put this up to full screen and kind of get into it. But first, I wanted to just point out for a second here. I've got a campaign up that if you're a Star Wars fan, it's definitely a book that I think you'll enjoy. It's a science fiction kind of action comic book. It's got a lot of Star Wars influences. It's got some Indiana Jones, some 80s cartoons, all that stuff. And it's live on zoop.gg now. And I've got the link down there in the description. So if you're into this stuff, definitely check this out if you can. I think you'll like it. But to get back to this, obviously my character looks a little bit like Luke. It's definitely one of the references I wanted to pull in when I was creating him in a specific look, because I wanted to take a character that was a lot like Luke Skywalker or Dick Grayson or Johnny Quest, somebody like that, and really put him through his paces and make him not necessarily a darker character, but somebody that's a little more cynical, a little bit more Clint Eastwood or Steve McQueen in there. And that was kind of one of the goals I had. But about the time I was really starting to put the final drafts of this together and make pitches is when I saw Last Jedi, and people really, a lot of discourse online about how they hated what they did to the character and all that stuff. And I kind of realized, to me, that was kind of a no-win scenario. I always thought like, well, if everything worked out really well for Luke, which was kind of what we want to see for him, there'd be no reason to make more movies. The galaxy could be a great place. They'd be, I don't know, sitting on a beach somewhere. So I think he always had to kind of be a failure if the story was going to continue in a way that still involved him, if he was still around. If it was, obviously generations later, really wouldn't matter, and he wouldn't be involved at all. But there was really, I think, no good way to give this character the ending we wanted to see for him, and also let the story go to a place, or the situation in the world of Star Wars go to a place where he had a reason to come back and fight or do anything at all. So I never really got too upset about the fact that he was a hermit living on this planet, and that obviously things had gone a little bit wrong for him, because it just seemed like, well, they're going to have to do something like that just to keep the story moving. And I think that points to the problem of bringing this stuff back. Is it's almost impossible to give everybody what they want from it. Either you've got Picard season 3, which I liked some parts of it, but I found the whole thing to be just like a little too, wow, is this what they really think I want to see? Just a little bit too much of it as far as the fan service goes. But at the same time, when they do different things, I haven't always enjoyed that either. Most times I kind of feel like, I kind of want to watch the old stuff again, but I want to wait for that to be new. And that's something I really wanted to, think about when I was putting together those first drafts I was going to send to publishers, was how do I kind of create something that, has a lot of the nostalgia, what we want to see from older stuff, but does it in a way that doesn't trip over those landmines of, oh, they changed this or a bad thing happened to this character and I didn't want to see that happen, sort of thing. So what I kind of ended up doing was being really cognizant of, hey, how do I make it clear that this character has had some change, but did exist in a very different kind of world previous to the adventure we're catching up with them at. And I think that was a really fun thing to be able to do, because I wanted to take this character. I made a lot of artwork that was, looked like old He-Man boxes or things like that. The intro to the story starts off looking a lot like a He-Man cartoon or any of those, G.I. Joe, any of that stuff. And I kind of use that to give it that history and kind of do what The Last Jedi does, but backwards. Hopefully to make it just as much fun, but not necessarily get you attached to that old version of the character and then be upset that, a thing happened to him differently than you might have hoped. And, when he comes back, when our adventure, Purgatory Underground, which is the book that we got live now, starts off, he's in a pretty bad place. He's been blamed for this terrible tragedy. He's probably not going to be able to stay in the service anymore. His enemies are still after him. And I feel like that was a great place dramatically to put the character. In the same way, I think a lot of what Last Jedi did with Luke was a good place to put the character in terms of how's this guy going to come back from this? You have to see them do something. They can't just be like happy and goalless all the time. And I think doing it this way kind of let me get away with that, is go back and give them impressions, the reader impressions of the history that this character had. Back in the day, sort of, at least in the lore of this, I kind of treated it like the older adventures were an 80s cartoon or something like that, and give you a way to jump onto the story while keeping a little bit of that in there. And I think that's where Star Wars had an impossible task. There was no way that was going to work out, because Luke had to mess up for there to be more story, and yet we don't like to think of that. I think they kind of, if they did it on purpose, were kind of smart about the way they put him in The Mandalorian, because he seemed pretty aloof, and you could sort of see that version of the character making the mistakes he ends up making that, puts him in the spot he is in the sequel movies. So, I mean, I liked parts of these movies a lot. I liked this battle he was in at the end. That was really cool. And I think most people liked that. But I think I can also see why everybody was so upset about where he ended up spending, half his life living in this island, kind of being angry, and not being the character we remember, and certainly not being, living the life that we'd hoped that character would get to have after Return of the Jedi. So, I could look at that and I think, like, boy, when you're bringing this stuff back, there might, for some of these characters, just be no way to make the new story compelling and have stakes, but also give you the characters like in the way that you want them. Because there was a lot I didn't like about The Last Jedi, and the other ones as well. But what they did to Luke was, certainly I didn't want to see that happen. But I guess I always expected to. I just thought, from a plot, viewpoint, there was no way he could have ended up in a very different situation. I think that if he had just been, some general leading what was the rebellion or something like that, it wouldn't have. It would have been like, well, okay, he's been fighting all this time, but how did it even get to that point? Because they had, just won at the end of the other one. So, that's something I've always kept in mind, because I'm always trying to be reader focused on this stuff. Like, what's fun for a reader to see? Even if it's something that's necessary for the story, if it's something I don't think is going to be that fun to go through as a reader, I really try and think of a different way to do it. Again, I don't want to kind of waste pages on stuff that people are like, okay, that scene kind of sucked. I want to get through it. I want to get to the cool part. And I think that's a real challenge. That's not necessarily what I'd call sort of an artistic or a writing challenge. It's just kind of a logistical challenge, and a challenge in thinking like, the person you're making the book for. What do those people want to see? And that's something I really tried to do with this book. So if you're a fan of this stuff, obviously Star Wars, there's a ton of Star Wars in this comic. There's a ton of Indiana Jones. There's a ton of visuals that are meant to be, like old 80s cartoons. And I hope it was a fun way to address some of the stuff we've seen, with Star Trek Picard, with the new Star Wars movies, with some of the Marvel stuff that people haven't really liked or responded well to, at least online, and think about why that happened and learn something from it. That has really helped me create this book. So, like I said, if you're into this stuff and you're into comics, I think you're really going to dig this book. Head over to zoop.gg. I think there's a couple days left where you can still get the early bird special, and hopefully you'll like it. I think it's obviously I think it's a great book, and if you're a fan of this stuff, I think you'll really enjoy it. Thanks for watching, and